Hey guys, it's Miss Landry, and this video is your first video of content. We're going to talk about Mod 1, which is the history of psychology. It's pretty boring, I do have to say. It's very important that you get the names, and some of the dates are kind of important. So let's jump right in. I'm going to try and make this fast. So here we go. The first thing I want you to know is what makes up a scientific attitude. So throughout this course, you're going to have to question a lot of things. So a scientific attitude has three main pieces. The first is curiosity. And if you're not curious about the world around you, it's hard to think about why or how or when or why is this happening. So always be curious. Secondly, you need to be skeptical. So, for example, if think about the news lately, right? Like, be skeptical. Try to find both sides. Try to disprove things. And then, last but not least, is humility. And I think this is probably the hardest one for most scientists. But basically, you need to be humble and admit when you're wrong. And it's okay. Science, there's a lot of wrong science out there. And it's okay to be wrong. You just need to make sure that you learn from it. Science is not perfect. That is very true. What is meant by the rat is always right? So this is basically saying that through experimentation and through questioning and testing, that's how you get to the truth. And we say the rat is always right because a lot of experiments are done with rats. And so the information you get from those experiences, it doesn't have any bias in it. It doesn't have opinions or beliefs. And so the rat is always right is important to remember. Basically, whenever you're reading something, think to yourself, are there assumptions I'm making? Is there inherent bias in this? Do the scientists have bias? Absolutely. We're human. We certainly have bias. If I believe my theory is correct and I'm doing an experiment, I'm biased. I want it to be correct. Always evaluate the evidence really critically and then assess the conclusions that scientists come up with very closely. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. This was a study that was done. They basically analyzed students who were chewing gum and taking tests and their alertness, I guess you could say. So I'm gonna get a pen here. So S is spearmint flavored, SR is spearmint flavored, and then given a second one. So the flavor goes away, you get another one replaced. GB, this one here is just gum base with no flavor, and then here is no gum. So you can see, and we'll go into what these bars mean. These are called standard errors of the mean. And as long as those bars aren't overlapping, then you can pretty confidently say that there's a difference in the data. Like this one, see how these kind of overlap? I could not say that there's much difference there, but these two I can. Now, you might think to yourself, oh, this is awesome. I really need to get some gum for my tests. This is where you become a critical reader. Guess who funded this? That's right. Oops, Wrigley's. Wrigley's, the gum company, funded this experiment. Now, that's not to say that it isn't accurate or valid, but just be critical, right? There is obviously a bias in this experiment. So just be aware of that. Okay, let's clear that and move on. So the first two people I want you to know are Socrates and Plato. Plato was actually Socrates' student. This was way back. And this was kind of the first time that they started, it was a philosophy. So psychology was a philosophy at this time. There were no experiments being done. There was the idea of dualism, where the mind and the body are completely separate. And Socrates actually believed that when you die, your body actually is gone, but your spirit or your mind continues. So that's kind of a cool thought. They also believe that we're born with knowledge, so it's innate, and they explained it as a classification knowledge. So for example, when you're born, you know that a triangle is not equal to a circle. It's not necessarily factual knowledge. So that was the first two. Then we go to Aristotle, who was Plato's student. So it goes, let's see, it goes Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. He actually said, no, I don't think knowledge is innate. It actually comes about due to experiments. And I like this quote of his: the mind is not only knowledge, but also the ability to apply that knowledge in practice. Sound familiar? Yes. Now we're going to jump forward like 2,000 years. I'm sure a lot happened in between there, but we just don't have a lot of time. Let's talk about Rene Descartes. He was a French, he was kind of almost like one of the first doctors. And he would actually study animals and he would do dissections on animals. And he actually believed, this is one of his drawings, that these hollow channels is what he called them, but they're actually nerves. He just didn't know that what they were, is what allows you to move, because the animal spirits go through these hollow channels creating movement. So you can see his image there. He also is the first one to say that there was a physical spot in the brain where the mind resides. He thought it was the pineal gland, which is a very small, this is another one of his little images, but it's a very small part of the brain. John Locke is another guy I want you to know. He came up with the term tabula rasa, which means blank slate. So he believed everybody is born, every human is born with no knowledge at all. We're just a blank slate. And the environment is going to determine if you turn out to be good or bad. So the worse your environment, the worse you're going to turn out. And the better your environment, the better you're going to turn out. He also believed, much like, who was it? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, that knowledge comes from experiences. This is one of his quotes: no man's knowledge here can go beyond his experience, which I thought is kind of interesting. I don't know if that's true anymore, because now we have some awesome AI. John Locke was also involved in empiricism, which is kind of looking at evidence. If you think of like empirical evidence, right? So he was the first one that kind of started to think about looking at evidence. And then we get to the first scientist. So up until now, psychology has really been a philosophy, a lot of thought, a lot of writing, but no experimentation. So Wilhelm Wundt is the first one to create a laboratory. So he created a laboratory and actually collected data. So this is when psychology goes from philosophy to a science. And this is his experiment. He had this cool machine and it would drop a ball, and then the person being tested had to press a button when they either heard the ball drop or when they were aware of hearing the ball drop. And what's interesting, let me show you this, is that he measured how long it took them. So if you picture a ball dropping through like a game and it hits and you press the buzzer. Well, then he did another experiment where he said, okay, I'm going to drop the ball drops. You can't press a buzzer until you're aware of having heard the ball drop. And interestingly, the awareness one took quite a bit longer, statistically significant longer. E.B. Titchener was one of Wundt's students. He kind of coined the idea of structuralism. And so this is, if you think about like chemistry, you guys all have just had chemistry. And think of like atoms, right? So atoms are the elements that build matter. And so Titchener wanted to figure out, well, what are the building blocks of the mind and of personality and all of that? So he's a structuralist, right? He actually worked a lot on introspection. And in this, like he would give them like a situation or something, and people would report on their experience. And this isn't really science, is it? Because this is so, I mean, it really depends on the person, it depends on the environment, it depends on the experience. So it's very hard to call this scientific. William James is the next one. So he did not believe in structuralism. He started a movement called functionalism. He was a functionalist. He was very influenced by Darwin's work, so a lot of evolutionary stuff. So a functionalist doesn't care about how, like what the pieces are, it just wants to know how it works, right? And so he wrote the first psychology textbook, and he's actually a funny guy. If you ever read stuff about him, he's pretty funny. Anyways, that's all I want to say about that. So make sure that you know the difference between structuralism and functionalism. A few more people, and then we're done. Mary Whiton Culkin was one of the first graduate students. It was actually William James's student. He admitted her into Harvard, but then Harvard actually denied her a PhD, even though she outscored every other male student in the school. They still said, no, you're a woman. We're not going to give you your PhD. Harvard's sister school that was for women offered it. And she said, no, I did all of the work. And so she went on to become the first female president of the American Psychological Association. Yay! But I think that's horrible. And it wasn't that long ago. Then we also have Margaret Floy Washburn. She was the first one to actually earn the PhD in psychology. And I say that, I actually think the one before it did earn it, but she was given the PhD. She studied a lot about animal minds and looked to compare them to the humans. I love this quote: nothing in the world is so compelling to the emotions as the mind of another human being. And that's so true. Nowadays, the majority of PhDs in psychology are women, but it's just nice to see how far we've moved. And last two things I want you to know: behaviorism. We're going to talk a lot about this, so if you don't get it, don't worry. The three main people involved in behaviorism that you're going to need to know: Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner. You probably have heard of Pavlov, right? Pavlov is the one who did classical conditioning with dogs, where he would ring the bell and get them to salivate at the sound of the bell rather than at the food. Freud is the one who developed psychoanalysis. Freud's stuff is actually not in great popularity lately, but he believed that the unconscious is what drives your behavior and that your unconscious is built based on childhood experiences. If you think about like a person on a couch, just talking about things, that is probably an example of psychoanalysis. So, okay, and last but not least, humanistic. Carl Roger and Abraham Maslow. Carl Rogers and me. Yeah, I'm really tired. But basically, this is a very positive psychology. It's one of the newer ones, and it focuses on a person's potential to be all that they can be. It's never too late to be who you might have been, and that is very true. And that is it for this. I know that was fast. We are going to go over all these people in great detail in other units. All I need you to know is just the basics. Thanks, guys.